For us, there was a lot of movement this past week in the top 10 rankings, so we'll run through all of that and where we think teams should be and the biggest movers in our top 25. The full rankings can be found on our Twitter at BashBrosBall or later on in the YouTube video. So, starting off at number 1, surprise, surprise, still Tennessee. Some polls around the nation had Oregon State jumping them last week. We stayed steady, kept Tennessee up there, and it proved to be the right decision as Oregon State lost their weekend series and Tennessee showed that they are still the team to beat.
Yeah, just not much conversation to be had. You entertained the thought last week with Oregon State starting to enter the discussion to potentially be the number 1 team, but it wasn't close enough for us, and you see why here as Tennessee stays consistent and Oregon State falters a little.
Yeah, and that's shown in our rankings with number 2 now being Virginia Tech. Great weekend series against a very good Louisville team, and that'll make them jump up 3 spots into that number 2 position, jumping a lot of other teams that didn't have great weekends.
Yeah, and I think this says a lot more about Virginia Tech more than it does Oregon State here. Virginia Tech, like we've said so many times, hasn't lost a weekend since March. They're just extremely hot right now, and with Oregon State dropping a series, you just kind of got to tip the cap to Virginia Tech there and give them that number 2 spot for the time being. Not ultra concerned about Oregon State, but Virginia Tech just looks to be the hotter team at this exact moment.
Yeah, and we dropped Oregon State only 1 spot to that number 3 position, and I think that's mainly because they've shown that they are one of the most consistent teams in the nation, and one bad week in Arizona. I think it's only their second series loss this season, and it's always going to be tough to go to Arizona in super, super hot temperatures, and with a very offensive ballpark, you're just not used to that kind of play, and losing a series there isn't a killer, but definitely doesn't help out. And then we can jump to another Pac-12 team, Stanford, jumping up 4 spots from number 8 to number 4 now. This kind of is the start of a run of teams jumping up big and jumping a lot of teams that previously held those spots for a very long time, but have shown that they're not as good, or at least down the stretch, as we thought they were at one point. And Stanford started out the season hot. They slowed down completely at the beginning of conference play, and they've really picked it up with some very dominant pitching and the hitting really starting to click in certain games, and they're a very, very scary team down the stretch.
Yeah, the hitters are finally going for Stanford. Brock Jones has finally got hot. You have Alex Williams dominating those Friday games. And then you got Quinn Matthews, who you can move around on the pitching staff, can start a game for you, can go long relief, could close a game if you needed him to. So looking like a very viable team in the postseason, and not a team I'd want to face at all. They have the makeup of an Omaha team.
Yeah, it's always scary with a guy who's a dominant Friday guy and then another pitcher who can pretty much do anything that the coaching staff wants and can fit any role no matter the situation, and that's something that is very scary in a regional or even a super regional. So another team jumping up a lot with 6 spots, Texas A&M now at number 5. Now this is a team that has pretty much skyrocketed up through the rankings these past few weeks, just showing off great performances and in consecutive weekends, and it's something that has shown to be one of the better teams in the SEC now, and definitely one of the hotter teams as we've seen.
Yeah, they've just been shooting up the rankings. I'm not sure that they're the most talented team in the SEC, but they're one of the hottest right now, playing extremely well. And I mean, you just gotta give them the nod there. I mean, they're playing extremely well, continue to win high level series, and that's why you see them jumping up like this. They haven't faltered in a while now.
Yeah, and at number 6, another Texas team, Texas Tech, jumping up 7 spots. This was a team that we were kind of high on, I guess, but low on at the same time. They were high in our rankings for a while, but we dropped them back for some okay series. They had a pretty bad stretch for a while, but have shown to turn it up recently, even though their pitching staff is suspect. they're able to get series wins, and sweeping Oklahoma State is definitely a bright spot in their schedule, and they've done well against good teams, which is what you need to do in regionals.
Yeah, you mentioned the pitching staff has looked a little iffy. The team still has over a 5 ERA, which is not great, but also, like you mentioned, they've played well against high caliber teams. And one thing I really like about them is they just seem to find a way to win those ugly games. Games where it doesn't seem like they should even be in it. They somehow find a way to win them. And I think that's valuable come postseason when games get messy and people are trying all sorts of things. I think that's a valuable experience for them heading into the postseason, and it could vie well for them in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Number 7, we have Arkansas dropping 3 spots. I feel like we definitely could have dropped them more, but still, it just feels like they have this untapped potential that they haven't reached yet. And they played a good series against a good Vanderbilt team that we have ranked in the top 20. So, this Arkansas team, it's just, what are we going to get out of them? Is there another step that they can get to, or is this team what we've seen so far, and is just offense is inconsistent, even though last year their offense was great and they didn't really lose many people. So it's interesting to see how things will turn out the rest of the season with this Arkansas team.
Yeah, still waiting for them to hit the next gear, but I mean, they still do have a good resume up until this point. That's why they're able to maintain being a top 10 team. Certainly would like to see them hit that next gear, but faltering right now, and hopefully they can figure it out in this last weekend in the SEC tourney and finally reach that potential that we know they have inside.
Yeah, it should be very interesting what they can pull off in the SEC tournament, because this team is, they might go out first round if things aren't clicking, but they could also win it. I wouldn't be surprised either way. But next we have Notre Dame at number 8, just jumping up 1 spot. They had a good weekend, but it wasn't against a top caliber competition. So jumping Arkansas didn't feel like the correct move, and I feel like we're already pretty high on Notre Dame to begin with a lot of polls having them around 10 or a little bit below there. So we have them at 8, and jumping up 1 spot from last week, I feel like that's fine for what we saw.
Yeah, like you mentioned, we were a little high on Notre Dame coming into this week in the rankings. And also, I just feel like at this moment, there's a slight drop off between that 7 and 8 spot right now. I feel like there's a little gap after those top 7 teams at the moment. Not that Notre Dame doesn't have that potential, but they've been a little inconsistent in the last month or so. So would like to see some more consistency out of them, but definitely a high caliber squad.
Yeah, and then at number 9, still slowly moving their way up, is Gonzaga, the one mid-major team that we have in the top 10. And they just continue to win their weekend series, just chug along and just put together a good resume so far. So they're a team that might be able to host a regional. They're in a good spot right now. We'll have to see how things finish out. But at number 9, they've just consistently been able to put together good series wins.
Yeah, not extremely impressive what they've done as of late, considering they're in the West Coast Conference, and Gonzaga just seems to keep winning 2 out of 3 on the weekend, which is great, but doesn't just blow off the charts or anything like that. But they have a great week ahead of them on the road at Oregon for a midweek, and then they also play a weekend series against San Diego, who is the second best team in the conference. So some quality games ahead. If they're able to take care of business, it'll really solidify them being ranked where they are.
Yeah, and then at number 10, and the start of a run of big droppers, like we've said during the top 10, a lot of these teams are going up, barely any moving down. Well, the big droppers come in the forms of Oklahoma State at 10, followed by Miami at 11 and Texas at 12. Oklahoma State rounding out the top 10, dropping out 7 spots from number 3 to number 10. Getting swept is just going to do that to you. And again, not looking great at home is a kind of a problem going forward. Hopefully they can figure that out, but They won't be playing home games, I believe, until probably a regional, if they can host. I mean, assuming they will host at this point, just because they've put together a pretty good resume and their RPI shows that, but definitely not trending in the right directions at home.
Yeah, especially with the sweep, like you said. If they had just lost 2 out of 3, you might find them in that 8 spot right behind Arkansas or right around there. But getting swept at home, just not impressive. They've been a consistent squad most of this year, though. Still an Omaha caliber team in our minds. That's why we have them at that 10 spot still. Yeah, I mean, I think it says a lot to get swept and still be in the top 10.
Yeah, definitely. And going through our other bigger movers, like we said before, Miami and Texas, both of them dropped 5 spots. The other big time movers that we have already talked about were in the top 10, so no need to really touch on them. But also LSU dropping 10. So a lot of these high caliber teams that we thought were potentially Omaha teams are now not looking great. They're losing series, they're getting swept, or they're not playing at all, like in Texas's case. And we were a bit high on them, but felt like, I don't know, there were better Big 12 teams that have proven themselves, and I still believe should be behind Oklahoma State, and that's kind of why they also fell at that time.
Yeah, and there was just some teams right behind Texas in our previous rankings that had some good quality weekends. And although they may not have jumped that much, they did hop over Texas, and then Texas just kept falling because we still thought those teams that were ahead of Texas that had rough weekends still had an overall more impressive resume than Texas at this moment, given Texas didn't play this last weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And going to LSU, who I said previously dropped 10 spots now to 22. They are very, very off and on. Who knows what you're going to get with this team? They get swept one weekend, they sweep another. It's going to be very interesting what they can pull out of the hat for the SEC tournament, and they're in a spot to potentially host if they can get hot and turn things around, but who knows? It seems like this team is just completely error prone, and that shows in the scorebook. And when they're giving up errors, the team just kind of falls apart.
Yeah, just hard to know what you're getting with that team. And I mean, since we've started doing our rankings, they just keep bouncing between borderline top 10 and down in the 20s, and the trend continues. So who knows? Maybe this upcoming week they'll take care of business at Vandy and change our minds once again.
Yeah, probably that'll happen. They'll just sweep Vandy or something like that right as we're high on Vandy, but we will have to see. Another big mover, I guess, is Arizona jumping into our top 25 now at 24. Great weekend series at Oregon State, even though it was at home, which gives a very, very big competitive advantage to Arizona. It just seems like that's probably one of the hardest places to go and play at. Just the combination of weather and the dimensions of the field is just brutal, and the infield is pretty much just like a parking lot. So it's tough to play there no matter what, and if they can get a host spot somehow, if they can do well in the conference tournament, that is definitely a team you do not want to be playing at.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're low in the RPI right now for a host spot, but they're playing well right now, and wouldn't be the biggest surprise if they came out on top in the Pac-12 tourney. If they did, you may see them get a host spot there, like you said, and huge competitive advantage at home for them. And yeah, they've just been playing well as of late, and teams at the bottom of the rankings, they lose some weekends here and there, and Arizona continues to win and build that resume even after their recent series loss. But their overall resume speaks for itself at this point. They're sitting at 4th place in the Pac-12 and could finish as high as 2nd after this weekend, depending how things go. So just the resume there, it speaks for itself at this point in the season.
Yeah, and the opposite of the recently joining the top 25 is the only team that dropped out with Georgia. They were in the 23 spot. We had been a bit easy on them the previous week just because they were playing tough competition, but we can't really keep them in after 3 straight weekend series losses. It's just not going to happen, even if they're playing amazing. They just even though playing Tennessee is always going to be a tough ask to kind of prove that you need to stay in the top 25, it needed to be done in this case just because of their previous weekend struggles.
Yeah, not any bad series losses these past 3 weeks, but both the series against LSU and Vandy were very winnable, and they just weren't able to get that extra game in order to win the series. And like you said, we had them at 23 in the rankings and said, you know what, if you can take a series from Tennessee, you definitely prove yourself and you earn that top 25 rankings. But it seemed inevitable that they would most likely lose that series and end up falling out after 3 straight series losses.
Thank you for watching and listening. If you enjoyed, we would greatly appreciate a like and subscribe for more weekly college baseball content.